Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Select Board meeting for Monday, June 3rd, 2019 at 7:15 p.m. I'd like to continue with the tradition that was started by some of my predecessors of introducing everyone having introduced themselves.
John Hurd.
Diane and Maham, Chair.
I'm Dan Dunn.
Steve DeCourcy.
Adam Chapdelaine, Town Manager.
Doug Heim, Town Council.
And Mrs. Kropalka, our Board Administrator, just had to step out to do something administratively, and she'll be right back. Okay, first agenda item is a proclamation to declare June as Pride Month in Arlington. I'd like to call on our Vice Chair, Mr. Dunn, who's done a lot of work on this, and will read the proclamation.
I haven't done a lot of work on it, but I will be delighted to read the proclamation. Whereas Pride events are held nationwide in June to celebrate the LGBTQIA+ community's enduring spirit and progress that has been made in establishing a more inclusive, just, and equal society for LGBTQIA+ individuals. And whereas the town's LGBTQIA+ Rainbow Commission is in its second year of work to promote equality-affirming policies regarding the full spectrum of sexual orientations and gender identities, and to bring greater visibility, empowerment to the LGBTQIA+ population through education and advocacy. And whereas celebrating Pride and displaying Pride flags are outward representations of the town's commitment to full inclusion of LGBTQI+ individuals in all aspects of Arlington's community life. And whereas Pride exists as an ongoing resistance to laws enacted to discriminate against people based on their sexual orientation or gender presentation, and to the harassment, violence, and forced disbandment of gatherings by the police and other law enforcement entities around the world that those laws have encouraged. And whereas the most celebrated incident of LGBTQIA+ resistance in the United States is the clash between bar patrons and the police on the night of June 28, 1969 at the Stonewall Inn in New York City during a discriminatory police raid. This event, largely credited to Black and transgender people, was a flashpoint for the gay rights movement. Information about the uprising is available at rainbowarlington.org. And whereas this year is the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising, which is the event the annual Pride events commemorate, and whereas police discrimination and violence against LGBTQI individuals has not yet been eradicated, and even in places where the police have worked hard to foster a positive relationship with the LGBTQIA+ community, there remains a rift caused by a century of trauma that will take a continued dedicated effort to heal. Work made more difficult when it intersects with issues of race, religion, disability, etc. And whereas the town of Arlington is committed to doing the work necessary to foster the healing between the police and the diverse LGBTQI+ community, this is evidenced by Arlington Police Chief's community policing policy, activity Chief Police Julian Flaherty's formal role as liaison to the Rainbow Commission, and department assistance in painting the rainbow crosswalk at Town Hall behind me. And whereas Pride is not only a time to gather in joyful community, but also an opportunity to reflect on and plan the work still ahead of us. Work that includes making all our social justice efforts more inclusive, equitable, and intersectional. And whereas the Town of Arlington bylaw declares that we value the diversity of our population and acknowledges that our town's mix of ethnic, religious, and cultural backgrounds and economic and personal circumstances enrich us all, and sets the goal that we will be known for the warm welcome and respect we extend to all. And whereas incidents of hate and intolerance over the past few years have challenged this dedication to embracing and protecting the wonderfully diverse population of the town of Arlington, now, therefore, be it resolved that we, the members of the Select Board, reaffirm our commitment to equal protections for all people regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression, and the ways those factors can intersect to further impact people who are marginalized because of race, color, religious views, national origin, citizenship, age, ancestry, family or marital status, disability, source of income, or military status. Be it further resolved that we designate June 2019 as Pride Month in Arlington, and it is signed by us all.
And I'll take that as a motion to approve by Mr. Dunn, seconded by
Second.
Mr. DeCourcy, Mr. Hurd. Motion.
I think you got me.
Okay.
I was going to hand it over.
Definitely.
Mel's the one who did all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If I could call on Acting Chief Flaherty. Good to see you, Chief.
Good evening, everyone. Julie Flaherty, Acting Police Chief. I just have a few words to say on behalf of the women and men of the Arlington Police Department. The Arlington Police Department is extremely proud of its partnership with the Rainbow Commission. As captain, I had served as the police liaison to the commission since it was established. When I was appointed as the acting police chief, I chose to remain the liaison and will continue in this role, as I believe our support for our LGBTQIA+ neighbors is best expressed from top. Our support for and friendship with our neighbors exist at all levels of our department, from the top to the newest patrol officer, however. I am aware of the history our neighbors have had with law enforcement on the national level, and the Arlington Police Department strives every day to build and improve relationships with our neighbors and fellow citizens. We know that this will take time, effort, and actions. This year, our entire police department will undergo 8 hours of training to assist law enforcement with better understanding and serving our LGBTQIA+ community members. This training, titled Out to Protect, was recommended by the Arlington Rainbow Commission. We will also continue to support the Commission in events and programming by absorbing the cost of detail offices for events such as painting the Town Hall crosswalk in colors of the rainbow. My message to you as your police chief is this: we exist to ensure the safety, security, and well-being of all citizens. LGBTQIA+ neighbors are citizens, and we demand and work every day to ensure equal protection under the law for all citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, closing out our, thank you very much, Chief. I really appreciate that. Closing out just a few announcements about Pride activities in Arlington. So as I mentioned, the crosswalk in front of Town Hall is now decorated with the rainbow colors of the Pride flag, with blue, pink, and the white of the transgender flag as well. Both flags are hanging outside along with Pride lights that are illuminating the building. There are two events that the Rainbow Commission is hosting. The first is Porch Fest Pride Stage. We'll host karaoke at the Academy Street entrance to the Senior Center on Saturday, June 8th from noon to 2. And the second annual Pride Picnic will be on Sunday from 1 to 4 p.m. In and around the Senior Center. And we could use some volunteers for both of those events. Three more quick notes. Robbins Library is screening the PBS documentary Stonewall Uprising on Thursday, June 13th at 6:30. And the Queer Book Group will be discussing the graphic novel The Prince and the Dressmaker on Wednesday, June 26th at 7 p.m. Also, the Rainbow Commission is looking for 2 additional commissioners if anyone is looking to volunteer. And you can read more about these and other events at rainbowarlington.org. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Did Mel want to? No? No. Anything from my colleagues? Mel, why don't you come? No. I do want to thank Mel and the Rainbow Commission for, all their hard work, and you've done so much education and advocation in such a short amount of time. It's truly impressive, and I think it's a good statement right here in the center of town that what we do is to the benefit of the whole town, not just the citizens, resident business owners, but also people passing through, so they can really get a sense of what Arlington and this community is about. And I want to thank the chief for her remarks, because I feel Arlington certainly has been in the forefront, and I know there's, starting from 1969, even before, with Stonewall, but and these proclamations come from the individual groups, and we pretty much transcribe them word for word and things like that. But I really think that the women and men of the Arlington Police Department, as the chief so adequately represented, are really at the forefront in terms of sensitivity and working with everybody and really trying to go above and beyond. So.
Mel Goldsype, Chair of the Rainbow Commission. I wasn't going to say anything, but I also wasn't expecting that beautiful statement from the police chief. She has been a wonderful partner in all of this work. I cannot thank her enough. And her officers who came and helped us paint. We had different officers 2 years in a row, so that was like at least 6 of them that I got to meet through this work, and everyone's been excellent and supportive. And Marie hung the rainbow flag for us, so thank you for that. And we just really appreciate your support. I will say that it would be lovely to not have to paint the rainbow flag in the crosswalk every year. So I'm just planting this thought that maybe we could do it permanently, because that crosswalk needs to be repainted anyway. So anyway, thank you.
I think my 2 sons will second that motion. This is their favorite month of the year to drive down Mass Ave.
Any further discussion, comment on a motion by Mr. Dunn, seconded by Mr. DeCoursey? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, unanimous vote. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
We now have the consent agenda. Request special one-day beer and wine license, June 8, 2019, Robbins Memorial Town Hall, private event. Danielle Markarian. Request special one-day beer and wine license, June 15, 2019, Whittemore Robbins House for private event. Lisa Deutsch. Request special one-day beer and wine license, June 15, 2019, Robbins Memorial Town Hall for private event. Babak Momini. Request special one-day all alcohol license, June 22, 2019, at Whittemore Robbins House for a private event. Jody Kurtz. Appointment of new election workers, Teresa DeVito, Mass Ave, Arlington. Deborah Gallagher, Shelley Road, Arlington. Gary Horowitz, Charlton Street, Arlington. And for approval, the Hackney Taxi Business Operators Permit Renewal for Boston Ride, Abdullah Magan. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
By Mr. Dunn, seconded
Second.
by Mr. Hurd. Is there anyone here to speak to any of those events? Any of my colleagues, any questions or comments? If not, on a motion by Mr. Dunn, seconded by Mr. Hurd, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those
Aye.
opposed, unanimous vote. We now go to agenda item 8, which is an appointment to Arlington Cultural Council of Susan Larson, term to expire June 30th, 2022. And as you probably know or been told, for brand-new appointments, we ask, when possible, that people come down so we can all see our faces and our names that match up. So if you could just say your name and, what brought you to this committee, the interest, and, what you'd like to see continuing forward.
I'm Susan Larson, and I was interested in volunteering on the committee. I've lived in Arlington for about 3 years now, and it seems like there's a vibrant arts scene, and I'm an arts professional, and I would just like to meet the people in town and get to know more people and contribute to the good work that I've been seeing being done.
First, is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. DeCoursey, seconded by
Second.
Mr. Hurd. Any questions or comments? I just want to say, Mr. Dunn? You go ahead.
I read your resume, and you're obviously very qualified, and we really appreciate you volunteering.
Thank you.
And one of the things, if Mr. Kiro were here, who's very involved with the Arlington Cultural Council and others, is that we're continually impressed with, first, how the commission is organized, second, the caliber of volunteers, I shouldn't even say volunteers, people who work on it, some paid, some unpaid, as well as the strides that you really can see throughout Arlington. And the grant writing opportunities, this really is a committee that does an awful lot of action. And I would say to Arlington, this is another example of where we're providing a much needed and appreciated Arlington service without using any tax dollars and relying on you all and your expertise to do it for free. So we definitely appreciate that. So
I'm excited to contribute.
yes. If any further discussions on a motion by Mr. DeCoursey, seconded by Mr. Hurd? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, unanimous vote. I believe we do have someone here for citizens' open forums.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you. So I will read the preamble. Except in unusual circumstances, any matter presented for consideration of the board shall neither be acted upon nor a decision made the night of the presentation in accordance with the policy under which the open forum was established. It should be noted there is a 3-minute time limit to present a concern or request. And I know, Mr. Klein, if you could just say your name and info.
Good evening. My name is Christian Klein. I'm here on behalf of the Friends of Robbins Farm Park. For a long number of years, up until the last 2 years, we hosted a July 4th event up at Robbins Farm Park. Unfortunately, fortunate for us, when the park was being redone, we had to shut down for 2 years because there was a fence around the field, so to let the grass grow. The grass, unfortunately, is not taking well, and we've been notified by Park and Rec that the field will be fenced off at the end of the athletic seasons this spring. And so we were looking for alternative ways to host this event. One idea we had was to try to sort of make it a little more of a street festival with taking over the piece of street between Brackett School and the park. And so this sort of came upon us very late last week. I'd really like to express my thanks to Chief Jefferson from the fire department, Chief Larity and Officer Retto from the police department, getting back to us and discussing their concerns with us in very short order. And so at this point, unfortunately, I think we've decided that given the amount of time we have to try to plan something and the security and safety issues involved in cutting down that particular section of street, especially when it's dark out, it's just going to be a little too difficult to manage. And so we're going to withdraw our, we had planned on asking the board to approve a closure of that stretch of the street on July 4th, and we are not going to go ahead with that. So I just wanted to bring you guys up to speed on all that. So thank you.
I have a question. I don't know if anyone in the room knows the answer to this, because I know the ideal viewing spot is the farm. I do see people pull over on Route 2, Concord Turnpike. Has anybody been down Spy Pond the night of July 4th? Can you see the fireworks from there, or is it too low?
I think it's too low.
Okay, all right. I'm not saying for this year, I'm just saying if for next year or something else. Okay.
Arlington 360 has a great view. They don't have a lot of room.
It's just not big enough. It's a fantastic view.
Yeah.
Oh,
The same with the viewing the circle up at the water tower.
Water
at
tower,
Park Circle,
yeah.
But unfortunately, there again, it's a street issue, and you're right across from the fire station, so.
Well, we definitely are disappointed, and we're very grateful for all the work that you have been trying to do to kind of pull this together, because I know that took many hours to.
Absolutely.
And I know you gave it your darndest and just couldn't make it
If only
happen.
we could make grass grow.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Oh. Just name and info for
Leonard
the
Diggins, 8 Windsor Street. Okay, so in my way of supporting, one of my ways of supporting the Building Arlington's Future campaign is to remind people to vote. And in the process of doing so, a resident was curious as to why the election was on a Tuesday instead of a Saturday. I was emphasizing that because I initially thought it was going to be on a Saturday too, and so trying to remind people, like, don't expect it to be on a Saturday, it's on a Tuesday. And so I didn't know the answer to that. And so I thought I would ask, and I could ask any of you individually, but I think other people might want to know too. So I figured I would ask, and if this isn't the right forum for answering the question, then maybe when you send out an email reminder, if there is a specific reason for it, you can let people know. So.
Yeah. I don't know why our locals are Saturday other than tradition, but I'd say it's one of the things that the election study committee, the town meeting created this year, could definitely take a look at.
Yeah, it's not a big deal. It was just a confusion point.
And I think some of the rationale for the June 11th date is we had so many time constraints in terms of when the Mass School Building Assistant Committee met, set out their guidelines to say, okay, you're approved, you move further up, you have a certain amount of time to put this to the voters, as well as under our town bylaws and state laws, we had a certain amount of days in terms of doing the advertising, as well as falling within the legality of the law, because we had a very tight time frame in which to have this. So I think it was a numbers thing versus, as Mr. Dunn said, it's just been tradition, local elections on Saturday, but that's certainly going to be discussed at the election committee that we've embarked on its mission. So it's basically following state law, following MSBA guidelines, so we do everything right. So if we are successful on June 11th, then we will be approved pending anything else by MSBA, and if we're not, then we won't get it.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else here for a citizens open forum? If not, citizens open forum is closed. Sorry, I still like my paper agenda. Yeah, but I have this too, I really do. Next, traffic rules and orders and other business for approval, agenda item 9, Transportation Advisory Committee recommendations, and I'll let you choose which is A and which is B. Just name and.
Howard Muse, Chair of the Transportation Advisory Committee. It indicates on here that there's 2 items for approval. Actually, there's only 1 item we're asking you to vote on. The second item is just a report back to you. The first one that we are asking you to take a vote on entails or involves a crosswalk on Summer Street at Victoria Road and Buzzell Field. The crosswalk is on the east side of the intersection, and at that location the road has a curve in it to the right, so that vehicles approaching the intersection heading east can have trouble seeing the crosswalk. And it's especially a problem when there are games, because people park on that side of the road right up to the crosswalk. This was raised by some residents and brought to the attention of the DPW and the police and our committee. So it's not something that you initially sent us, but we decided to take a look at it because it certainly seemed to have some merit and a concern. We are kind of approaching it in steps. What we're recommending tonight is a first step, but we're continuing to look at the intersection for other possibilities. What we'd like you to have you vote on tonight is to establish a no parking area 40 feet before the crosswalk on the eastbound side, 5 feet after the crosswalk on the eastbound side, and on the westbound side, a no parking zone. It's about a space. It's between the last driveway before the intersection and the intersection itself. In our report, we have the actual, I think, the address. So the hope is that that will give us a little better visibility as vehicles approach the crosswalk. We did have some neighbors at our meeting, and they were in agreement with this. They are also looking for us to look at some additional measures. One is we're considering whether we can move the crosswalk to the west side of the intersection, which brings it further back in the curve in the road. And hopefully with the kind of restriction, parking restriction we're talking about, it would greatly improve the visibility. We could also look at something like flashing beacon or a bump out, although the road is not very wide there. There is no parking lane. It's actually a narrow shoulder through that area. But we will continue to look at that, both from an engineering and planning standpoint. So for tonight, we're asking you to approve those no parking areas. That basically would eliminate 3 places where cars can park now when there are games. To my knowledge, I don't know that there's much parking there other than when there are games.
That's exactly.
And there's no off-street parking, so the only place people can park is on the street. So you may hear some complaints if you eliminate those areas. But we think it would make the crosswalk much safer.
Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. DeCoursey, seconded by, I heard Mr. Dunn, sorry. They chimed in, so I'm.
I thought they both moved.
They did, so I was like, okay, I gotta do this. Be fair. Mr. Hurd?
Yeah. Because I spend a lot of time here now for T-ball, but so is there a reason that you guys chose the 40 feet instead of the normal 20 feet from the crosswalk? Was it because of the?
Yes.
Did you look at the 20 feet?
We have, we've adopted some guidelines for when we evaluate crosswalks. And yes, we normally look at 20 feet. However, that's on a road in which it's basically a straight approach to the crosswalk. With the curve, we felt like we needed more room than that to get it back far enough to help improve the visibility.
It is at times a high-demand parking area,
Yes.
which safety first, but be careful what you wish for, because some of these neighbors that are asking for this are getting out of cars parked in front of their house for good portions of the day. But
Mr. DeCoursey?
And I agree, that's a really dangerous crosswalk, and I know you're looking into the possibility of moving the crosswalk to the west side, which actually I think would line up the crosswalk with the exit from the park. Is there a reason why you wouldn't want to do that now, or do you just need more study?
Well, there were, one concern was that there's a lot of people that turn left from Summer Street onto Victoria Road, and we didn't know whether that made it better for people to try to cross the crosswalk where it is now, as opposed if you moved it, those two moves would people crossing would be conflicting with that left turning volume. So we're taking a little closer look at that. Also, we're not sure, I think there is a ramp at that corner, but I'm not sure it's configured the right way for crossing Summer Street. So we'd need to look at whether we could make the ramp fit ADA requirements and how much that might cost. So those are the kind of things that we're looking at.
Okay.
But I think we feel there is a strong case for moving it if it's feasible and everything else works out.
and I don't know if that addresses the concern on the curve of the road, if it goes to the westerly side, you may still need the 40 feet. I don't know, ahead of that.
Well, the westerly side, you'd have the intersection itself.
Yeah.
And then this area to the driveway that we're asking you to put in no parking area. So we would have a pretty good limit. Plus, in that case, the road is actually curving to the left for people going westbound. So the visibility is not quite the issue there that is on the other approach.
Okay, thank you.
And just because it's sort of interwoven here tonight a couple of times, just a FYI for TAC, but also conversation with the town manager, talking about crosswalks and painting them. Every now and then I bang Paolo Marinelli's thermoplastic sidewalk application, which we were kind of moving prior to your tenure, moving towards that, and that kind of stalled. As well as, I went by the sidewalk that the Medford High, I think they were middle school students, came up with. And it really does slow traffic down, 3D. So I guess I would say, through the town manager, as we're moving forward, what happened to the thermoplastic sidewalks? Because I'm told not only does it last longer, it's a raised surface that water can permeate through, but you can see it far sooner than you can that. And then we have the motion seconded by Mr. Hurd's son about the crosswalk out here. But maybe if, when appropriate over the course of the next year with Mike Rademacher or whomever, and I'm not saying it's thermoplastic, but maybe there's something else, because it seems like people are doing new, creative, innovative ways. So I'm not looking for, but I was really impressed with, it was in front of an elementary school. I want to say the Carroll, started with the C. It's the second one they did, and it really is effective. And as well as if we could get an answer on the thermoplastic, or if anyone from TAC or Public Works says, this is the new thermoplastic application of the time.
Would you like an answer to some of that now?
If you feel, yeah.
So, DPW, I think maybe 3 years ago now, I'm not sure if it was in consultation with TAC or not, but started using epoxy mix, so it's not paint, it's not thermoplastic, it's not as slippery as the thermoplastic, but it's not as expensive as the thermoplastic. The thermoplastic should last about 5 years, this epoxy should last about 3 to 4 years. So on the main thoroughfares, Mass Ave, Broadway, Summer Street, they have been using the epoxy. Side streets, they've been still using paint. I think it may be more likely that we need to redo the epoxy application and make sure everything's fresh around town.
Okay, thank you. I knew there had to be a reason. Okay, and now, Mr. Hughes, Howard, Herbert Road.
The second item is traffic calming on Herbert Road. I think it was at an April meeting that you received a lengthy petition for asking for traffic calming measures there. And that crossed paths with, in a way, crossed paths with earlier this year, we had requested and you approved a speed safety zone at that location, which would reduce the speed limit to 20 miles an hour. It had not been installed up to that point. Primarily, I think it was because of the winter weather. So once that gets in, and I don't know yet whether it's gotten in, but hopefully soon, we'd like to monitor it over the summertime and see whether it has an effect on speeds in that area and whether speeds are basically staying in line with the regulation. And if they are not, then we can revisit the idea of other traffic calming measures. The reason we had recommended the speed safety zone is the original request was from the Recreation Department to look at a speed table at the intersection itself with Magnolia Street. That was going to cost $100,000 because of all the utilities that are located within that intersection. So we did not recommend that. That seemed like an awful lot of money to try to do that. Basically what we're doing is we're not going to take any further action until we see how the speed safety zone works out. If it continues to be a problem, then we certainly would be willing to look at other traffic calming measures for Herbert Road in that area. And I just wanted to let you know that because you had recently sent us that petition.
Thank you so much. And could I, since this is not a vote, take a motion from one of my colleagues to move receipt on the traffic calming report on Herbert Road by Mr. Hurd, seconded by Mr. Dunn. Any questions or comments? If not, on a motion by Mr. Hurd, seconded by Mr. Dunn.
It's just, I don't think we actually voted the first one yet, did we?
Okay, I'm sorry. See, that's why you have a good vice chair. First, we'll do the motion by Mr. DeCoursey, seconded by Mr. Dunn, to approve crosswalk requests on Summer Street. Any further discussion or questions? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed. We'll then take the motion to move receipt by Mr. Hurd, seconded by Mr. Dunn. Any further questions or comments? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, unanimous vote. Thank you, Howard.
Thank you very
Good to
much.
see you. I'd like to take a motion to table at the request of Ms. Stansberry. Agenda item 10, motion to table by
So moved.
Mr. Dunn, seconded by Mr. Hurd. I believe this will be appearing on a future agenda, but I'm not sure, so. It is, okay. A motion by Mr. Dunn, seconded by Mr. Hurd. Any further questions or comments? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, unanimous vote. Next, we have a discussion and approval presented by our town manager, Mr. Chapdelaine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this first item is in regards to changing the name of the senior center to community center. This is part of really what's become a national trend of not naming senior centers just senior centers, but making them have a more welcoming feel to the entire community, though the programming would still remain focused on senior members of the community. So this has been brought before the redevelopment board, who has jurisdiction over the building, and they've approved it. The Council on Aging and the Arlington Senior Association have considered this, and though they've not taken a formal vote, they're not in opposition to this. And before finalizing this, we wanted to bring this matter before the Select Board for their endorsement as well.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. DeCoursey, seconded by
Second.
Mr. Dunn. Any questions or comments? And I do appreciate, as the manager said, this is sort of, it's coming from the senior community and other community members who use what will soon be in the former senior center, but now the community center.
It's funny, it is a legitimate common thing we hear from seniors in the community that they don't want to go to the senior center because they don't want to hang out with a bunch of old people. So I think it does make sense to make it seem like a more comprehensive facility.
Okay, I don't think anyone's here for this agenda item. On a motion by Mr. DeCoursey, seconded by Mr. Dunn. Any further questions or comments? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed. Next agenda item, I will turn over again to the town manager, Mr. Chapdelaine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the board might recall that residents or abutters to Regis Road came before the board a number of months ago. Regis Road runs from River Street over to the Thompson School. Private way, it's in very bad condition. Likely was exacerbated by construction work on the Thompson project. So Mike Rademacher as well as Jim Feeney have been working pretty extensively with the abutters. And as Mr. Feeney laid out in his memo, they are moving towards a betterment, but they've also learned that soon, probably in the next year or so, it's likely that there'll be a gas main replacement in the road. So going forward with a betterment before that happens would not be a wise choice. Waiting, we'll probably get some resources from National Grid once that project's done to be able to make the betterment less costly to the abutters. However, in the interim, the abutters are willing to do some of the prep work on the road, shut down the road, have them scoop out the holes, clean out the holes, so that DPW can come in and put in some temporary asphalt patching. The pathway to do that via the still somewhat new bylaw is for the board to authorize that based on the DPW director's assessment that the current condition of the road makes it unsafe for the passage of emergency vehicles. So I think this is actually a really good first authorization for the board to give. It is private way abutters coming together. They have a long-term plan. They're trying to get through the short term. They're partnering with the town to get the work done. And again, it's towards an end goal of getting it paved, hopefully in a year or two from now.
Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Moved by Mr. Hurd, seconded by Mr. DeCoursey. Is there anyone here for Regis Road? I just want to say, I think we embarked on this about a year and a half ago with Peter Messina and others, and it's really a good testament to residents coming in and on a private way. A lot of people say, some private way owners say, you know, there's never any relief, there's, you know, the town doesn't do anything for us, they don't hear us, and thanks to Mr. Chapdelaine and Assistant Town Manager, Mr. Feeney, and our DPW Director, Mike Rademacher, I know they've been out there at various junctions, meeting with people, sometimes on a corner I know I popped down, but I've largely stayed away because they're all taking care of it, and they're the movers and shakers that get this done. So I think it's a really good partnership. I think it's, as the manager said, an excellent example of an application of this bylaw, because the neighbors want to avail themselves of the betterment program, but because the holes are so large, they are so close to the Thompson School, and those heavy equipment trucks will continue to come down, especially with Algonquin gas. I think this is a great short-term, really low-budget solution. So thank you to everyone who made that happen. On a motion by Mr. Hurd, seconded by Mr. DeCoursey. Any further comments or questions, Mr. DeCoursey?
A couple of questions. I think this is a great plan. Just on the removal of the debris in the memo from Mr. Feeney, it talks about it being removed at a later date. And I know school will be in session probably for a couple weeks after that. That's a Saturday that the neighbors are going to be working on it. Can we give them some assurances that it will, like a later date isn't 2 weeks later, it's the following week?
Yes, yeah, we can definitely do that. I'll make note of that, but that's a good point.
And same thing with the asphalt patching, because the street will need to be used for access to the school. So it may not be Monday, but it'd be nice if there was some timeline there.
Okay.
Makes
sense.
I don't think, did we vote that? I don't think so. On a motion by Mr. Hurd, seconded by Mr. DeCoursey regarding approval temporary repairs to Regis Road. Any further comments or questions? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, unanimous vote. He's a busy guy tonight. Agenda item 13, I'll turn over to our town manager, Mr. Chapdelaine.
Thank you. They're all lined up. So this is a proposed revision to the charter of the Parking Implementation and Governance Committee, also suggesting changing its names to the Parking Advisory Committee. This is a little bit of an example of the competent shall be punished. So the Parking Implementation and Governance Committee was put together to oversee the Arlington Center Parking Management Plan and the Parking Benefit District. It's been meeting for several years now. And in the course of meeting, issues with parking in East Arlington have been brought to the group, issues with parking in Arlington Heights have been brought to the group, and I'm not sure that the group's actually made any recommendations to the board, although it may have on some handicap parking spots. The issues are coming to the group, and it seems like it's a group willing to do the work with an expanded roster to make sure we have representation from those communities, from those neighborhoods, excuse me. We'd be asking the board to rename it, give them authority over the business and commercial areas of the Heights, the Center, and East Arlington, and have them be the body that analyzes concerns, parking in those areas, and brings back recommendations to the select board.
Okay, Mr. Hurd.
2 comments in support. One, I think it's great because the Parking Implementation Governance Committee has been so successful in revamping the parking in the center. I think it's been great. And now they can expand it to some areas that need it. And 2, that is the worst name that was ever come up for any.
Yeah, trying to say that early in the morning.
I used to be on it, I was like, I'm on the PIG. So, thank you for making that easier.
Oh, was it a motion to approve, Mr. Hurd?
Move approval.
Seconded by?
Second.
Mr. Dunn. Anyone here to speak to that? If not, any further comments or questions from my colleague? On a motion by Mr. Hurd, seconded by Ms. Dunn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, unanimous vote. And we now come to some requests for authorization regarding Parmenter School. Mr. Chapdelaine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is a 2-part request. One, the first request is to authorize, requesting authorization for me to sign the lease extension with Arlington Children's Center for a 5-year extension in the Parmenter School. The board had already previously authorized the town to send them a notice of our willingness to renew. This is actually just authorizing the actual renewal with the updated capital contribution contained within the letter from Matt Dolan from the Arlington Children's Center. So there'd be an increase in the capital contribution. All the terms of the lease would remain in place, including the 2% increase in rent every year over the duration of the term.
Okay. So first a motion to approve the
approval.
Moved by Mr. Dunn, seconded by
Second.
Mr. Hurd. Anyone here for this? Any further questions or comments? On a motion by Mr. Dunn, seconded by Mr. Hurd to authorize the request for the lease extension, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, unanimous vote. We go to 14B.
So this second matter, I think as the board is aware, we plan as part of the high school renovation to use the space that the international school is vacating as of June 30th as a temporary site for the Monotony Preschool while the high school's under construction. We'll come back with further information about that once plans go more into the design phase. But when ISB leaves, we'll have about a 6-month period before we'll need to access that space for renovation and then eventual habitation by the preschool. So 2 groups have approached me, as well as I think maybe a few board members, about using some space. Food Link is interested in leasing the ground floor space. They need to leave the food pantry because the food pantry is being built into a mixed-use development, and their new space on Summer Street won't be ready by July, so they're interested in the 6-month window. ACC is also interested in renting a couple classrooms on what would be, I guess, the 2nd floor, but the 1st floor for ACC during that 6-month period, just to enhance their programming for that short period of time. So what I'd like to request is for the board's authorization to issue an RFP for the lease of each of those spaces. Have to do it competitively. Of course, it would be specific to these uses that people are inquiring about, but we put it out for competitive lease, hoping to start just a little bit after July 1st.
So motion to approve?
Motion
By
to
Mr. Hurd?
issue an RFP for the space
Is there a second?
as described.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Dunn. Any questions? Anyone here to speak to this? Just sort of as a side note, and I did have a conversation with the manager on Friday when we were discussing this agenda item. It's sort of an adjunct to it. I had asked the manager if it would be possible. I got calls probably 3-4 years ago about the middle or the end of Academy Street as it intersects Irving. Somehow we approved, and I went back and found the history of how it happened. I just don't want to go into that. But what happens is, as you're coming up Academy Street, going west, well, going up towards Irving, there's already parking on the right-hand side. But there was approval for 5 15-minute only live drop-off spots. And after I tried to go through there one time, gave up first time after 16 minutes, the next 12, I just went down Irving. I did sit there like a month or 2 later and just sat on Irving for 32 minutes. And it's not only the 4 or 5 spots that are signed for live parking, 15-minute only, it's also created the effect that people are parking further back in that lane where there aren't signs. And what happens is, as you're coming up Academy Street, it bottlenecks up. And if you try to take a left from Irving onto Academy, it's impossible. So, and a lot of the neighbors have spoken about that, and I always felt bad. I didn't really pursue it because I understood the mechanics of how it was done, and I thought through, with the evolution of time, there would become an opportunity where we could look at this again, and it wouldn't be that anything was being erased or promise made. It didn't go through. So I'd ask the manager if he could perhaps look at that, because it basically blocks that street off for a good almost 45. And when I sat there for those 2 times, the 4 authorized spots all parked, and I stayed 32 minutes because my lucky number's 4, I had to do it. And then the next time I sat, like a week or 2 later, I sat for 32 minutes. One person did come out after about 20 minutes, but the other 3 just stayed. So they're not being used. So I'm not saying maybe that is a use, and maybe it should just be one, but if you could look at that so that we don't bottleneck Academy Street up. I think a lot of people in Arlington have learned, don't go down, especially from Gray, don't try to get to the town hall or anything down Academy Street. So I just want to make my colleagues aware of that. And it may come back that we have to keep the spaces, but I'd really like that looked at.
Yeah, I think you're correct. This is an opportune time to look at it. International school is leaving. Construction will start probably in January or February, so this would be a good time to look at how should we do it for the 6-month intervening period, how should we do it while construction's underway, and then how should we do it once the preschool and ACC are operating next to one another. So I think it's a good time to look at it.
So that's not included in the vote, that's just an aside, so. So on a motion by Mr. Hurd, seconded by Mr. Dunn, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, unanimous vote. And now we again turn to Mr. Chapdelaine, our town manager, for agenda item 15.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'll actually be brief on this one, and Scott Mullen from Lyme is here, I think, to speak to the request. But Lyme is looking for a 1-year extension of their license for bike share in town. They have some changes this year in terms of the amount of bikes they'll have. Instead of a set amount, they'd like to have a supply-based or a demand-based supply. I think overall we've seen the project or the program as a success. It's been well utilized. I think over the winter, as the bikes numbers went down, we had people asking questions about where the bikes have gone. So it seems to have been a highly utilized program in town. Not perfect from a parking point of view, but I think Lyme has been good on correcting issues and We've tried to continually push out through our communication channels, reminders to people how to park the Lime bikes if they utilize them. But with that, I think we should ask if the board is so willing to let Scott talk a little bit about what their plan is for
Oh,
the
I
next
should
year.
take, I'm sorry. Made you wait. Sorry about that.
So thanks for having me. As Manager Chapdelaine said, I'm Scott Mullen. I've been before this board many times. Thanks for having me back again. I submitted our request. We'd love to come back for another year, as we've done, renewing with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council the master contract. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
First, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Mr. Dunn, seconded by
Second.
Mr. Hurd. Any comments, questions, queries? Anyone here? If not, sorry, Mr. Dunn.
So I'm curious, other communities, are you expanding out this year or shrinking, and I'm just curious what the overall program's been like.
Yeah, great question. So we don't expect to deviate from the existing license, which is 50 bikes minimum, 300 bikes maximum. The deviation this year is we've had a very wet spring, so you haven't seen that many bikes. We've actually barely peaked at, I think 98 was the max we've had here on a single day. As trips per vehicle per day increase, the bikes will increase. Now that the rain has hopefully stopped, we expect that to happen very quickly. But I don't expect to deviate from what's in the original license.
Yeah, no, sorry, that's interesting, but I was trying to ask a different question.
Okay.
Like, so what, like, as I recall, when you rolled out to like, was it 13 or 16 communities?
15 communities are in that master contract,
And
correct.
how many are renewing?
Everybody, so Waltham didn't launch last year, Milton also did not launch, and nor did Medford. Medford was supposed to launch today. We have a slight hiccup. We're going to go in and meet with the council on Wednesday. We should be launched there, but Waltham and Milton have not indicated that they're going to go through with it, but everybody else has already been on board.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Hurd. I'm
So
sorry.
I think you answered my question originally to Mr. Dent, but so you don't anticipate that you're going to have less than 50 bikes out there?
We're
during
required
peak
per
season?
this license a minimum of 50, correct?
Right.
Yep.
Okay, so I didn't know if you were asking to change that.
Nope,
So you're still going to maintain the 50 minimum?
minimum, correct, yep.
Just as a side note, I've said this before, and it's not related to this, but my wife just came back from Nashville, and she said that she took Lime scooters all around Nashville.
Oh,
and
Nashville, yeah.
It was the greatest thing she ever did. So she's a big believer in it, so
Yeah.
I'm interested still in exploring that as well.
Any further questions, comments, discussion on a motion by Mr. Dunn, seconded by Mr. Hurd? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, unanimous vote. We now come to,
Madam Chair, Pat Dolan from the ACC just came in. I don't know if you wanted to say just anything
oh, sure.
to the board.
Hi, how are you?
The board approved the lease extension as well as putting out an RFP for the space, but
I was at a...
You want to come up to the microphone? That's okay. Just say your name, and then if you just want to add anything that,
It's Matt Dolan. Well, thank you very much for voting in the affirmative. I appreciate it. I missed the meeting. I was at a subcommittee meeting at the school committee about lack of space in the public schools for after-school programs. And I don't know, have you voted on the RFP
Yes.
as well?
Yeah.
Just so you know, one of the things we'll do, it's only temporary, but is we will use one of the smaller spaces we're hoping to get just as office space for my coordinators for that program because they lost their office space at the public school. So we are hoping for that. And thank you very much again for your vote in the affirmative. I appreciate it.
and just as a brief, I did ask the manager, which is not included in the vote,
Sure.
that from years before, a previous board voted to allow 4 live drop-off 15-minute parking spaces in front of Academy.
Correct.
That they've been widely abused, and people aren't using it, and it basically closes off Academy Street coming from Irving. So I did ask the manager, because what it is people are parking on both sides, and they're also parking further back where there is no signage. So I just asked the manager through the police department, the transportation advisory, to look at that and make sure something's in place during the 3 different phases of rental, construction, ultimate.
Absolutely.
To make that work better. And I did.
I share some, it sounds like some
Thank you.
concerns that you have, and I'm not opposed at all to greater enforcement. Often the wrong side is being used by landscapers, delivery trucks, oil trucks, things like that. And when that happens, you literally can't get down Academy Street. I am fully aware of it.
So I just want you to aware, I just asked for the discussion, and we'll see where it goes. But it's not part of the vote.
Absolutely. All right, well, thank you very much
Thank you
again.
so much.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate
Yeah.
it. Okay, board designee committee appointments. First of all, the ghost of town hall. I apologize for rustling through my papers for the previous 4 or 5 agenda items. I had the email that my colleague submitted to Mrs. Kropelka.
If you want to.
Oh, do you have them there?
Yeah. This is mine.
And there seems to be a lot of flexibility. What I wanted to do was, go through all these and then, have conversations about, I see in here, unless everybody wants to do it here tonight, but there's a couple of possible 3 people interested. But what I did want to pose was just quickly go through each of these committees. I know when I first came on the board, the local emergency planning committee had 2 members from the board. It only has 1. I think it should go back to the 2, because it's really not a voting committee. It's a, and then I was wondering if any of the committees that my colleagues serve on, whether it's a committee formed by us, by town meeting, where there's only 1 designated select person to vote, if it's an active enough committee that there could be 2, so that if my personal circumstances, I can't go to that, the other person, as well as both select people could go, but only 1 could vote, but both could speak. So, but I don't want to do that to a committee, a subcommittee, that it's not really needed. So you're, Mr. Dunn, the tree committee.
So I think I've been to 1 ever. I'm more, my liaison with them is more through email and helping, like connecting them with Marie and other people in town when they need it. So I'm most happy to give that up if somebody else wants to be a more active participant in it. But I also am happy to keep it.
Okay. And Mr. Hurd, the Committee on Tourism and Economic Development, is that a 1 selectman thing, or would it benefit?
I mean, I think.
In terms of the meetings, do they not meet that much?
Yeah, it's not an overwhelming time commitment.
Okay.
It's, sometimes they have events that require selectmen to go, but it's easy enough in that instance to just get somebody.
That's fine. And Mr. Curo has indicated he's pretty much lenient on any of the committees, although he did cite 1 preference. So I think the Parking Implementation Governance Committee, the 1 selectman would be appropriate, unless anyone thinks different. The School Committee Liaison, if it's okay, Mr. DeCoursey has volunteered to take that on. If we could, I could appoint him tonight. If for some reason in the course of that, Mr. DeCoursey, you feel there should be a 2nd selectman or whomever, please let us know. Mr. Dunn, the Minuteman Bikeway, that's probably done, is that committee? So that's defunct. Mr. Dunn, the Marijuana Study Committee, do you think there should be 2 select people there, or if we give out a 3rd, it'll kind of be winding down?
Yeah, and I would say probably not. I would say, so that committee gets a lot of representation from the planning department as well. Okay. So,
okay.
Yeah, I mean, I said, if somebody else wishes that seat, I'm happy to pass it along, but that one I actually have gone to the meetings.
Okay. CDBG is set in terms of it has to be 2. I will.
Sorry.
No, Mr.
I was going to say, I'm willing to, I saw other people who wanted to join that. I'm happy to step off that one.
Okay, so, from memory, was there more than 1 person that wanted to? No, I know Mr. Hurd did.
Oh, is it just Mr. Hurd? Okay, yes.
Is it just, okay,
Yep.
so we
Yeah,
will, Mr. Dunn will now be Mr. Hurd.
I did that one, I've done that one, I think 8 years, so.
That's time to
Yeah.
go. Snow and Ice Subcommittee, originally when it started out, it was very active. There were 2 selectmen, so if there's interest in 2. Same thing with the Parking Subcommittee. That's, the Snow and Ice Committee really meets very rarely. We can go a year or 2. It's usually when there's major storm events, when there's upcoming major purchases of equipment by DPW, and sometimes, I'll get a heads up from somebody down at Public Works or the town manager, which just more times than not prompts me in the committee if I hear from somebody from that venue. So it's not a big.
Why don't I'll also put my, I'll
Good.
take that one.
And I know the
Is that for
employees.
snow and ice and parking?
No, Snow and Ice.
Okay.
And then the same thing with the Parking Subcommittee?
I'm happy to jump on that too, because
Okay.
anything that meets during the day is.
Yeah, I mean, and what that does, and the parameters of that committee can change. I mean, it's basically, the five of us, you know, Officer Rateau, Marie Kopelka, sometimes someone from Board of Health or whomever, we pick a spot, like when we get Westminster, and we go out, and if it's a 10, 15-minute meeting, that's it, and it's good. So, I mean, if somebody else had an interest in that and wanted to take my spot,
I just had a question about it.
yeah, yes.
Relative to what we just talked about, now that the PAC is going to be all across the town, would it make sense to combine those two, or do they have separate functions?
So, I mean, this, if I may, Madam Chair, this subcommittee hasn't met in a long time. Even when it met, it usually, though, focused more on residential issues, whereas this PAC is supposed to be more focused on commercial, so I guess maybe it could be refreshed.
Yeah, yeah. Mr. DeCoursey, would you like to also serve on that with Mr. Hurd?
Sure.
Okay. And then you guys can kind of set the parameters of where it goes.
I guess it makes more sense to keep the residential stuff out of the purview of the PAC, to not
From the
overbog
membership.
that. Yeah.
Rainbow Commission,
Happy to keep it, happy to bring someone else if they want.
I was thinking I couldn't do this all tonight, but I'm not really sure.
I didn't see anybody else who asked for that one.
Yeah, the ones we've gone through, especially, did anyone have interest in parking implementation? Is that which one is Joe?
I know Joe is on that now.
Yeah, but he said he'd be willing to give up some of the assignments because he has the most. Okay, so we'll put Mr. Hurd. Okay, and then that brings us down to Sunnyside Ave neighbors. At one point we had two, it was Ms. Rowe and myself. It's really, right now, it's meeting inactive because Algonquin gas is in there. So if it flares up when anything DCR is out there, which is owned by the state and we have no control, or when DCR gives permits like for Algonquin gas and they totally tear up down there. So it's sort of a, you know, can wax and wane. So if there's anyone else that's interested in that, when it does, right now what has happened is Algonquin gas is out there. The neighbors are having the usual sort of runaround in terms of contacting the town. The town literally has no jurisdiction out there unless there's a public safety issue. The town manager, the assistant town manager, Jim Feeney, and acting police chief Julie Flaherty have been involved and provided information to the neighbors, but initially it was through something called like One Bridge, On Bridge, whatever the consultant is that DCR hired, but they basically weren't getting anything, the neighbors down there. So I had contacted and actually asked Clarissa to do it too, even though, actually at the time she was on the board. And thanks to Mr. Chapdelaine and Mr. Feeney, we have been, even though there's nothing we can do, there's been one on-site meeting with some of the neighbors, there's, with the town, with Mr. Feeney, there's one more neighborhood meeting planned for sort of a closeout meeting to hear from the neighbors. Mr. Feeney will take back to Mr. Chapdelaine what items haven't been closed out that we have no control over, but we're glad to follow up on, as well as the town manager will follow up with our legislative delegation, Senator Friedman and Representative Garverly, who is that area. So if anyone wants to jump on that one, it's fine, but it probably won't flare up again for another, hopefully, 3-4 years. Local Emergency Planning Committee. I don't want to, I'm trying to say, did Joe have one he said he really wanted? I hope I'm not taking him. Can you see one he says?
Yeah, no, I think it says good.
Yeah, okay. Yes, I should say. Okay, yeah, so that's what we go back to, Local Emergency Planning Committee. There used to be 2 selectmen, because I know, because it was one of my first requests, and 2 were given out, and I didn't get it. But if the manager wants to, maybe, again, it's sort of episodic. Can you give kind of a brief?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're meeting once, maybe twice a year. Most of our requirements for our emergency planning we do now at the regional level, that Chief Jefferson, as well as the Deputy Emergency Management Director Owen Carrigan attend those regional, REPC Regional Emergency Planning Committees. So we just met 2 weeks ago, and I don't think we'll meet again for a year. So it's interesting. I think it's interesting for a board member to be there and see the planning that occurs, but it's very late. lift
Mr.
schedule.
DeCoursey? Okay. Did I give up anything? Yes, okay, sorry. Oh, no, I don't want to keep, I feel like I'm on Mr. Curo. Long-range planning, I think two of us were, not me, interested in that. I'd like to definitely have Mr. Dunn continue, just for continuity and.
That is the one I really would like to
Yes,
see.
yes. Long-range planning, I think two of my other colleagues, so I guess what I'll do is I'll just have a conversation. We'll just figure out, unless at the end of this, somebody realizes I have too many things, so I'll skip on that one to let me know. ITAC, is that still?
It still meets. I will say, I haven't been, the timing is really inconvenient for me for work, and so I haven't been to it for quite a while. It's Thursdays at 6 o'clock, and David Good runs it over in the town manager's office once a month. And I'd say it probably gets postponed once a year and canceled once a year, so it's like, 10 meetings a year or something like that. It does like capital review, and it also reviews some of the IT projects. I have not been a contributing member, so I'm very happy to pass that one along.
Steve or John?
I think that's generally going to be a tough time.
Yeah, that's kind of a tough time for me too, but
Okay,
why don't we,
I'll also
back to
check
that.
with Joe on that.
Is that a citizen committee?
Yeah, a mix, staff and citizen.
What?
It's a mix of staff and citizen.
The model on it was to try to get volunteers who are local volunteers with a good skill set to free consulting for the town type thing, which I think it's been okay at, but not amazing.
Okay, Council on Aging, I'd like to leave Mr. Curo there, because he's been organized. Did anyone have a request for that?
Yes.
Yeah, but I think, I wouldn't take that from Joe without.
Yeah, I've taken about 4 or 5. Gotta leave him something. AYCC, did anyone express interest in that? I know when he goes, he's a very active representative, but I don't recall anyone. So we'll leave Mr. Curo on that. Applications and Permits Working Group. So it seems to meet very rarely. Maybe another episodic. I really don't know what it is.
I think that's kind of Joe's baby, but like he's very focused on that work, so it probably makes sense to
Keep him there. Transportation Advisory, I'm going to leave that with Mr. Hurd.
That's fine.
Investment Policy Working Group,
I think we've met once, maybe twice. I'm happy to continue that one. I find it
leave
interesting.
Mr. Dunn. Scholarship Program Working Group, I know of at least one. Was there a second? Okay, so
and I had expressed an interest in it as well. I don't know if you want to put 2 on it or.
why don't we do that? And I guess I would just say by protocol that you both go. If there has to be a vote, it falls to Mr. Curo. Unless he's not there, it falls to you. So we'll put Mr. Curo and Mr. DeCoursey on that. And now the committee, the manager spoke to us at the last meeting, and nobody was beating down the doors. But I think now that we've had time to understand what the committee is, and can you remind me what the meeting requirements generally are?
8 a.m. on Friday mornings. I think we're on the 3rd Friday of every month, or maybe the last Friday of every month.
Okay,
I'll sign up.
Mr. Dunn. And I guess I would check with the board administrator, Mrs. Kopelka, and/or the town manager, Mr. Chapdelaine. Are we missing any committees that we've recently voted, or?
Can I grab Joe's email there? Yeah,
Yes.
cool.
It was just the Clean Energy Future Committee that needed somebody.
Did the board need a designee to the election study committee? Without the language in front of me,
I think we do. So what I'll do is, can we make it, should we make it an agenda item so we can get the information out about, or do you want to make it one of your agenda items, and then you can provide us the information of what the, and then everybody can think about it, and you all let me know which one of you all, including Mr. Curo. And we'll do that at the July meeting, because we do have one more meeting in June, don't we?
We do. Yeah. So Joe had 2 more to put on, at least that he called out. One was the Arlington Cultural District Managing Partnership. He says quarterly. And he said Jermaine Lawrence Neighborhood. And so do you want to formalize both those as well?
Sure.
So
Is it 2 separate ones?
Yep.
And I think he's saying he wants to continue that. I would just say, first I'll take a motion to approve Select Board Subcommittee, Arlington Cultural District Managing Partnership. Motion by
So moved.
Mr. Dunn, seconded by Mr. Hurd. And I just want to ask the manager, is this because it says Cultural District Managing Partnership Committee, is this the committee where there's been some conversations with Jermaine Lawrence, who were the former owners, tenants, and now possibly McLean's? Is that the role, or is that something completely different?
So there's the
Those are
Jermaine
two
Lawrence,
separate.
and then there's the cultural district, which is the managing partnership is a cooperative between the town, the libraries, and the
Okay.
Chamber of Commerce to manage the cultural district here in Arlington Center.
Okay. And Jermaine Lawrence, when do they meet?
That's been ad hoc. It's not really, there's no set meeting time.
Okay, so how about if, on a motion by Mr. Dunn, seconded by Mr. Hurd, to appoint Mr. Carroll to the Arlington Cultural District Managing Partnership? Any further questions or comments? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? And then on the Jermaine Lawrence Neighborhood Liaison, could we, Joe's definitely fallen into that role, but it is a group that meets intermittently, and I think we'll have a structured timeline. If the manager could contact the chair and vice chair for any future meetings, and between the two of us, one of us will make sure to be there. I mean, I have an interest in it, where it's close to my house, plus working with some neighborhood groups, but maybe if instead of making that a subcommittee, because it's going to be.
I didn't interpret it as a subcommittee. I thought he was just taking,
Yeah.
kind of taking point.
So just whenever they meet in the future, if Mr. Chaplain could notify the two of us, and between the two of us, we'll make sure. And I know sometimes the meetings, you're literally finding out about them 72, 48 hours in advance, so I think we've done it all. I didn't think we'd get through that. I think I have, which is the one I'm going to talk to that everybody,
Oh, long-range planning
long-range planning. Okay, so I'll have that resolved by the next meeting.
and elections.
Long-range and and Mr. Chaplain or Mrs. Kropelka can put elections on with board info at the next meeting in June. Next, we have correspondence received, request tax relief for senior citizen renters. Nancy Forte from Lake Street. First is a motion to receive.
So moved.
Mr. Dunn, seconded by
Second.
Mr. Hurd. I'm so sorry. Would you like to come up to the microphone and just say your name and address? And you definitely can speak, but we're just receiving it. We really can't until we post it.
Hi.
I don't want you to think we're being disrespectful and not
Nancy
answering.
Forte, live at 110 Lake Street, Apartment 1. And with the upcoming vote, I just had an idea, that's all. There's tax relief possibly for senior citizens who are owners. And I thought of a possibility of tax relief for owners who are renting to senior citizens. Just an idea. But I also feel privileged to have been at this meeting tonight and see another reason why I love Arlington. So,
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming in. On a motion to receive by Mr. Dunn, seconded by Mr. Hurd, and thank you, Ms. Forte, for bearing with us through the whole meeting. Any further questions or comments? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, unanimous vote. We now have new business. Mrs. Kropelka?
Nothing other than you all know about next Tuesday. That's the big news. And I have nothing else.
Attorney Heim?
I don't want to say anything that a member of the board won't say, but I think I share a lot of the sentiments of other people who work in government, thinking about the people of Virginia Beach and the staff who work in those departments.
Attorney Heim. Mr. Chapdelaine?
Just three quick items. One, I'd like to thank Jeff Chunglo, our VSO, as well as the Veterans Council and the board members who were able to attend the Memorial Day ceremonies. I thought it was a very nice, short but poignant ceremony that Jeff put together, and I think all the board members have probably seen it, but the public should know now outside the select board chambers is a chair that's dedicated to the 3 Arlington residents who were missing in action. So a seat from town hall has been taken and dedicated to them as sort of a seat that's held for them, having never come back home. So all told, I thought it was a very nice event. Next, I quickly wanted to mention, I think I've mentioned this under a prior new business, but we have a figure now. The town has been awarded a Safe Routes to Schools grant for the Stratton neighborhood in the amount of $887,000 for some pretty significant pedestrian safety improvements in the Stratton neighborhood. So big credit to Dan Amstutz and the planning department for writing that grant on short notice, working with neighbors as well as the school administration to put that together. So we're very excited to be able to access that grant. Did I get a
You said
question?
3, didn't you? No.
And the third one is, there'll be more follow-up on this, but I wanted to just tell the board that I've been meeting with members of the ARB and the planning director on a path forward from town meeting. And one of the things we'd like to do is have myself and the planning director talk with the board over a series of a number of agenda items about data and statistics on housing in the region and in Arlington that will lead up to, if the board would be so willing to entertain it, a joint meeting with the ARB sometime in the fall to talk about what the ARB actually may pursue for zoning changes in the future. So I think I heard several board members talk about a desire for there to be more dialogue here as well as at the ARB. So we'd like to do that over the course of the next 3 or 4 months to be able to work towards next year's annual town meeting. That's all I have.
And thank you and commend you for hearing that request. And I'm happy it's more than one member of the board because sometimes, and I don't strive to have more meetings, but I think that would be an important joint meeting to hold one or perhaps a few more times than that to make sure we're planning correctly and moving forward with something that will be successful. So anything else, Mr. Chairman?
That's all I have. Thank you.
Mr. DeCoursey?
Yeah, I have a couple of items, 2 or 3 items, and I'll try to be brief. First, I also want to echo what the town manager said on the Memorial Day program that was here at Town Hall in the March to the cemetery. Mr. Chungla did an outstanding job, and I also had attended the ceremony at the Ottoson Middle School with the 7th and 8th graders, and they honored veterans. There were 13 veterans who were there that were brought in. The 7th and 8th graders couldn't have been better. They were just, they really showed a tremendous amount of respect for the veterans and for the entire program. And Mr. Chunglo and Bob Bartholomew ran it, and they did a great job. One question for the manager, and this, after the ceremony on Memorial Day, my wife and I went over to the columbarium, and there is an area there that I think has been a concern just for people who are visiting their loved ones who are interred there. Is I think they'd like to see if there's a possibility of putting a bench there or just a quieter area and working on that area. And I know it has come up at the Cemetery Commission from time to time, and there might be some challenges, but I'm wondering if you could look into that with the DPW director, if there are any issues in terms of drainage there that prevent this, or if we can get going. Second thing, Saturday I attended the Arlington High graduation. 325 graduates from Arlington High School, so I want to congratulate all of them. My son Mark was a graduate. Mr. Cura's daughter Savannah was a graduate, and it was a great program. The student speakers were outstanding. The faculty speaker was great, Mr. Matten, English teacher. I want to recognize one student who couldn't be there on Saturday, and that's because he was running in the state finals for the all-state track meet. So Ryan Oosting is a senior at Arlington High School. The state track meet final was at 4:30 on Saturday in Westfield. Arlington High's graduation was at 3 o'clock. Ryan won his second straight state championship in the 2-mile. He beat the second place finisher by 8 seconds, which is an eternity in racing. So I want to congratulate him, but I also want to congratulate all the graduates at Arlington High. The last thing is today, I was talking to Ms. Mahan earlier today, and Mark had his last event at Arlington High School. The tennis team had made the tournament. They lost today to a tough Wayland team. But I want to thank the coach of the tennis team, Matt Siegel, who had Mark for 4 years. He just does an outstanding job with the students, as do all the coaches. But this one was special because Mark was on the team for 4 years. Every kid on that team had a great experience. There were 27 of them this year, which is probably the biggest roster he's ever had. They all bought into the system. They respect each other. They respect the program. And he did a wonderful job. And they came up short, but not in the spirit department. So thank you to Matt Siegel.
Yeah, congratulations. Mr. Dunn?
No item. Oh, no, sorry. Vote. June 13th. Oh, June 11th. Yeah. Tuesday, coming up on Tuesday. Everybody vote.
7 and 8.
7 a.m., 8 p.m. Thank you, Mrs. Kropalka.
Mr. Hurd?
Just quickly echo the comments about the Memorial Day celebration and thank Jeff Chunglo for a great event. I took a lot of comments from people that said what a great event it has turned into, and it really doesn't let down every year that we have it, so.
And just on that, also want to thank Jeff's wife, Diane Chunglo. And I'm always making a point to thank her because she does do an awful lot to help our event with her husband. But more times than not, the main speaker, honorary speaker, says they want to thank Jeff and Diane. And I want to make it clear, it's not, because so many people came up to me and saying, oh, we should have known you were involved with this. It's Jeff Chunglo's wife, Diane Chunglo, and she really does do a lot. They were talking about how that chair was done, how it was picked, what work they did on it, finished it, but not to perfection. I mean, there's a lot of hours, as well as when the honorary speakers do come to town, Diane and Jeff, usually escort them around to other events, not just on Memorial Day. And Diane's one of our best unpaid assistant veterans directors that the town could have. And then just two things just to kind of keep plugging it out there. I spoke with Mrs. Kropalka regarding this. I don't believe I spoke with Mr. Chapdelaine, the town manager. After this election cycle, that board out front, it still says Board of Selectmen. Can we get a new one? It's looking really rugged and tired. It does say Board of Selectmen, and our quote is, "It's your civic duty to vote." If anyone wants to have a conversation around that, if it should be changed, I don't want to make us design a new one just to do it, but every time I go past that, it's kind of like, when I used to go past my son's room when he was a teenager, don't look, don't look, don't look. So, and I'm assuming hopefully that wouldn't be a high cost item. And then the last thing, which I know Mr. Chapdelaine and the deputy town manager, Mr. Pooler, Sandy, have been working on, but this has been, years long, over 2 years, those massively heavy doors in front of Town Hall. I understand because of the mechanics that's in there, and I was down there with one of the workers, the corrosion, as well as the age of how those doors were designed. It's kind of like the high school the elevator at the high school. As soon as they fix a part, because it's so old, another one goes out and it's not there. I think, Mr. Chapdelaine, am I correct is that scheduled to be in the near future? What it is I seem like we keep fixing it because it's so old and so corroded, it's just gonna break down again. And I can't tell you how many, not just seniors, but, disabled people, even for me to pull that door on a windy day. So I have a memory of someone saying it may be fixed in an upcoming project, or if not, how are we addressing that?
So we're currently designing resetting all of the stones in the front of Town Hall.
That's
We have resources set aside for that. And as part of that, we're going to take that pad out, and we're going to put in an eye so that it can see when people are approaching the door and have the automatic arms open it up. Part of the challenge is what you're describing, that pad gets corroded, but also the pad is somewhat short, so if you step on it and you're walking at a good clip, the doors are going to open right into you.
Or you're pushing a wheelchair. That's what I got a couple calls from people. The person they were pushing got right in the legs. And
So by setting up the eye, if the eye is looking far enough away, the doors will open before a wheelchair or someone walking would hit it.
So the big heavy doors won't be so heavy because the eye will pick them up at that first
And they'll
entrance.
open up,
And then the
automatic
second quick
opener.
swing doors, okay, that's fine. And I appreciate that. I'm not being sarcastic or anything. If there's no further business, I'll take a motion to adjourn by Mr. Dunn, seconded by Mr. Hurd. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, unanimous vote. Thank you so much.